But I feel really, really good about finally being in a position of knowing that, like, with all the values that I've kind of attached to myself, that I know that I'm kind of continuing to lead with, they match a kind of personal ambition for communication of these themes that I care so deeply about.
You know what, Tristan? Every time I talk to you, I remember how much I enjoy talking to you. Tristan, Tristan Walker, my dear friend. I'm so excited about this. Like seriously, to the point of being giddy to get to talk to you about it. Okay, so look,
Absolutely.
e- anybody who knows anything knows Tristan Walker has this incredible acumen in business, success in business, started your own company, Walker and Co. Very successful, sold it to Procter and Gamble. Um, you are, in addition to business, you're a parent, you're an entrepreneur, you're a craftsman and an explorer, which we will talk about a little bit later, which I think is fascinating. So we've known each other for a decade now, and I'm going to be selfish, at least for part of this, because I want to talk about Tristan the person. And but I do want to say for anybody who's listening, just to put in perspective of who you are. Okay. Named USA Today's Person of the Year, Time 100 Next list, Ebony Magazine's 100 Most Powerful People, Forbes Magazine, Top 50 World's Greatest Leaders, number 19, by the way. So you weren't even at 49. You were all the way up there. Like, this is really incredible. And as much as you've had a contribution in sort of the world's eye, I think the things that you do as a human being are even more substantial. And from sorry for the long intro, but again, I'm so excited to get to talk to you about this. Values, legacy, and stability.
Mhm.
Like, these are three buckets that we've talked about
A
so
lot.
often over the years. And I want to give that glimpse to the rest of the world because your insights are amazing. So, so here's where we're going to go, but I want to start really by just, um, welcoming you and thank you for being
No,
here.
thank you, man. I love spending time with you. And you've seen it from the very beginning. And all those accomplishments that you had mentioned were not without support from team, family, but certainly the work that we got to do together, of which I am and remain like really, really grateful. I really, really do.
Yeah, this has been one where I've certainly felt blessed and grateful over the years to be able to do that. So this idea, the three pillars that we're talking about, which are clearly not independent of each other,
Yeah.
values, legacy, and stability. Let's start with values, which sort of interestingly is where we started our conversation a long time ago. What does that mean to you? What are values to you?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with a lot of companies that had a homepage or a website, and they would list these values. And I've had for 100% of those companies, founders who've not only listed those values on the homepage but couldn't remember them. And I knew I never wanted to be a part of building something like that, right? That's kind of park that to the side a little bit. Second, around the time that I turned 30, before I started my company, I wanted to really think about who I was, who I wanted to be, who I wanted people, what I wanted people to know of me, right? And that really came down to understanding what my personal values were. What were the things that guided me, shaped me for those first 30 years of my life, and the things that I think are worth holding on to for the next 30 plus. And I'll never forget, I went to a Starbucks on El Camino Real in Palo Alto, California. This was about a month before I started my company, and I spent an hour reflecting and writing those values down, right? And I came up with six of them. Um, they were courage, inspiration, respect, judgment, wellness, and loyalty. I defined each one, and I promised myself from that time forward to do a couple things. Number one, um, to really rethink um, the things I do and with whom I do it then, right? There are a lot of folks I liked, but many of those folks didn't share my values. And it wasn't necessarily that they were bad people. It was just, yeah, I'd prefer to spend my time with people that were loyal and courageous and inspiring, right? That like cared about taking care of their family and their wellness, right? So I think it was really refreshing to not only identify who those people were, but also think about the causes that I was going to support. And then secondly, I wanted to entrench those values in every single thing that I did for my business, right? So when we'd hire people, recruit people, interview people, we'd ask them leading questions to get at the heart of those values, right? What makes you loyal and respectful and courageous? But also during kind of semi-annual annual reviews, you're rated against your goal attainment, but also your adherence to those values, right? So it creates a level of consistency, stability, as you say, but also provides a shared language, most importantly, not only between kind of me and the folks who work for me, right? But also me and the friends that I have. And in times of difficulty, we could solve those problems in the language of those values, right? We were not being courageous at this point. We were not being loyal to our customers at this point, and so on. And it's served me well ever since to really, when everything's going what I feel potentially poorly, what do my values tell me to do next? And you and I have had a real good, strong relationship, primarily because you continue to remind me of that fact by asking me that question.
Yeah, I mean and one of the really great things is that it's been reciprocated as well. You've brought that up to me as well, which has been really helpful. G- You know, so I, I was just thinking about this as you were talking, your life story, right? From early on, which by itself is remarkable. I mean, where you grew up, how you uh, sort of escaped from that area and so forth. If you don't mind, can you talk about that from as early as you'd like
Mhm.
and how that aligns with your current values?
Yeah. I should also say, like, I have a life that is rich in blessings and privilege. I grew up in Queens, New York. From the time I was born until about, I was 14 years old or so, my family's still there. But I lived in Jamaica, Queens, Flushing, Queens. It was difficult, but I was very fortunate to get opportunities to kind of expand and broaden my ambition and potential. So when I was about 14, I had the opportunity to go to one of the top boarding schools in the country, called the Hatcher School, on full scholarship. And that fundamentally changed my life. It was 4 years that completely changed my life. And I got to see how the other half lived, right? Rockefellers and Fords, right? Like I got to go to school with folks that kind of carried that legacy.
And
Uh,
this was an academic scholarship,
it
right?
was an academic full scholarship.
Yep.
The school cost tens of thousands of dollars a year. My roommate, my freshman year, is from Switzerland, great, great guy. And, it broadened my understanding of the world and kind of shaped my ambition of, what I could do for myself on behalf of my family and my community. So it was a real formative kind of 4 years for me, certainly academically rigorous, and showed me like, hey, rather than kind of taking the easy way out, right? That there were these other opportunities for my career that I can pursue.
Tristan,
Um,
can I ask you to go back for just a second?
sure.
How is it that you were discovered that how did you get there in the first place?
Yeah. So, again, rich in blessings. Back in Queens, I went to this after school program, the Boys Club of New York. You pay 75 cents each year, and you get access to, a place where you can go do your homework, you can play basketball, there's summer camps, all that stuff. And, it's probably the greatest ROI investment my mother and I have ever made. Um, they had a team. So there were about four locations around the city, one in Queens, there were three in Manhattan. They had two programs that were fairly unique. One called Academic All-Stars. It was a basketball team. This basketball team would travel all around New England to play these kind of boarding schools to give these basketball players access to kind of that world, right? And then combined with that Academic All-Stars program, they had what they called the education program, which is a pathway to taking the SSAT, which is the test you need to take to, potentially apply to these schools. And if you get in, then they'll help you get the full scholarship, ride, support system, et cetera. I didn't know about the education program. I knew about Academic All-Stars. I tried out. So tryouts were in Harlem. I lived in Queens. Like I was, gosh, 13. My mom was like, "You're not going to be traveling every night." So there were like three tryouts. I made it kind of two tryouts in, and then I left because my mother is like, "No, you're not. You're not going to be doing this, right?" Um, and then we had actually a friend who worked at the Boys Club in Queens, who is a friend of my mom's for probably 2 decades. And she said, your son, pretty smart kid, like he should take this SSAT thing. And on a whim, one of the following weekends, I went and took the test. My mom was like, you're going to do it regardless of whether or not you want. And I was already thinking about kind of high schools, that sort of thing. So I took it, and when I handed in the actual test, right, when it was all done, there was a gentleman standing there. His name was Anthony Blake, who changed my life. He said, "You were at the basketball practices, weren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I really can't go." Or the tryouts. I was like, "Yeah, I can't go. It's too far, all that stuff." And he was like, "What are your grades? Like, what's your kind of grade point average?" And I was like, I get a 97 average in junior high school." And he was like, "Don't worry, like we got you." A few weeks after that, I got a call from Anthony Blake saying, "Hey, there's two schools that want to accept you." And this was after the admissions deadline. Or it wasn't even just the application. It was like they have already selected kids who are going to kind of be admitted for the next year. He said, there were two schools that were still excited about you, but you're going to have to make this decision within a week, right? One of those schools was in California, and then one of those schools was in Connecticut. I was really partial to the California school because the basketball coach was like buttering me up, and I was really excited about it there in Santa Barbara. And I was really thinking about going, but Hotchkiss, the school I ended up going to, said, "We need your decision in like literally 5 days." So we took a drive on the weekend up to that school and accepted on the spot. So
Hmm.
by the luck of the draw, tried out for that team, couldn't go, took the test. Anthony Blake was there. And then, like weeks later, I had to make a decision, not knowing really the legacy of either of the schools, and ended up making the right one. And, my life has been a bit of a random walk, but, it's, there's almost a linearity still to that randomness that I've been very fortunate to have experienced.
It's, one of the things that's really interesting to me about that is it, and you reflect this a lot, is there seems to be a randomness to it,
Yeah.
and you have gratitude and blessings around that, but you had to be a good student, you had to be bright, you had to be, all of these kinds of things, right? The old adage, when preparation meets opportunity, right? And so this happened. So we're going to get to this in a minute, but fortunately, you did get to go to California, but that
Yeah.
was later on. Okay, so keep going with us. You're going to the boarding school and
Yeah,
continue.
so what's interesting is you asked me to kind of connected to kind of values of today, one thing that I didn't share, which is kind of really important to me, but it's like my catch-all value, so to speak, is just faith, right? Like I have a life that has worked out.
Hmm.
I've had fairly traumatizing experiences, but I've had the faith to know that, with a little bit of courage and a little bit of loyalty and continued respect and wellness and so much of my take care of myself, it'll work out, you know? And I think at Hotchkiss, it was one of those first moments of realization that, like, okay, I was like starting my faith journey in a way that um, I would believe that it would work out, you know? It was pretty daunting, again, academically, it was pretty daunting socially, um, but I thrived. By the time I'm a senior, I'm a varsity captain of two sports. I'm on the honor roll. When I got into Hotchkiss, I didn't know what a verb was. When I got to Hotchkiss, I remember I didn't have a blazer. I mean, it's kind of dress code. I didn't have a computer. I had to go with my advisor to the basement of one of my dorms, and then they kind of gifted me an Apple IIe
Yeah.
computer.
Yeah.
Everybody else
Yeah.
had these really, that was like my first computer, and there was like a Blazer that was lying there that like I got to use. So to go from like my Apple IIe, not knowing what a verb was, to like thriving at Hotchkiss, right? So much so that like I was able to skip a year of university, you know. Um, really told me that, like, man, like you dig into your faith a little bit, things will work just fine.
It's this particular value. We've had several conversations around it. I remember actually sharing a picture. I just saw this guy walking down the street, and he had his T-shirt, and it said "Faith over Fear,"
Yeah.
which I thought was fantastic, and had that on my screensaver for a long time. But this idea of faith, many, many times in our conversations, we've talked about this particular value in whatever was going on in your life. Is there anything that you can remember from our conversations or otherwise that where this one really came front and center later on in your life?
Yeah. I mean, you know this well, around the time we were thinking about selling the company.
Hmm.
Um, we sold the company in part because, we had to. You know, it was a real trying time. The markets for fundraising were drying up. The markets for sorts of companies like ours in the consumer packaged goods space were kind of drying up. And it was a really interesting time because if you might recall, once we started to realize that we couldn't raise money and that sort of thing, and then we needed to potentially do a reduction in force to, thrive and survive. At that same moment, these large companies started to come and suggest potential partnership without any understanding or knowledge of like what our situation was, et cetera, right? And it was one of those moments like, like it's working out. Like if you continue to do the right thing, right? You're transparent with your people, using a shared language that they're used to your kind of using, folks are fight for you and with you.
Hmm.
And for me, no matter kind of what obstacles might come up, if I know I'm around people with those shared values who are willing to kind of fight in a togetherness sort of way, it all works out. But that's kind of one of many examples like it. And look, here I am, like wonderful family, in a wonderful house, with a wonderful career. And I think through that experience in particular, there was something that I kind of carried with me. Walker and Company, my time in business school, even my time in Hotchkiss, where I had to reflect on the fact that my worst case scenario after all those experiences were better than 99% of the world's best case scenario. My privilege, my blessings are incredible. So for me to complain about any of it would have been markedly selfish, you know? So I had to be grateful for those blessings. And I think that gratefulness with the faith has been a wonderful complementary package for me as I've gotten older.
Yeah, and as I'm hearing you, I think one of the things that jumps out at me is one of your greatest blessings is that you recognize your blessings.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I'm very, I think about them every day. You
Yeah.
know, I, um, the one thing that I've really internalized is, like there are good seasons and there are bad seasons. And what I can't predict is the length of each. But what I can predict is that seasons end and new ones start, and as long as I just embrace that seasonality, right? It served me well. Like bad seasons, no matter how long, they'll end at some point, you know. Especially if I kind of stick and stay true to my values. But I also have to reflect on the fact that those really, really good seasons, you have to take those blessings for what they are and be grateful for them because they are not permanent.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to that point, right, you don't know when the season ends because you're partly responsible for that.
Yeah,
And but yeah, the season reason lifetime, the thing we've talked about several times, that and there is an elegance to that and a grace to that as well. And
yeah.
to be able to be in that moment instead of you know questioning why is this happening, it's et cetera, from a looking at it from the proactive perspective that you do, like, okay, what value is there
Mhm.
in this season? So we're going to get back to college, which I think is a really interesting story as well. But while we're on this topic around the values, you've had things that have happened in your life that have been in the moment negative. They've been difficult. They've been, to some extent traumatizing, and so forth. Some of those moments have turned into some of the greatest blessings you've had. And some of those moments may not have. They may still resonate in a negative way for you. Can you talk a little bit about both of those?
Yeah. I got kicked out of Hotchkiss, and that was one of the most trying experiences of my life because I loved my time there. I got kicked out for doing something stupid, just plagiarism. It was dumb. Um, it was kid stuff, you know. Now, interestingly enough, now that I'm, gosh, 41 years old now, I reflect back on that moment as a moment where it's not my fault, kids do dumb things, and I wish that I were treated a little bit more gracefully in that situation, because for the next 20 years of my life, I thought, man, like you really messed up. You shouldn't have done that. But, man, my frontal lobe wasn't developed. It was dumb. While it was dumb, like it was not wholly in my control, and the school could have done a better job. That said, I still remain thankful for what Hotchkiss did to me. And I got kicked out my last quarter. Oh, we had some, yeah, quarters. Did we have quarters? I think we had quarters. Semesters. The last half of my last semester at Hotchkiss, my senior year. So it was the spring season, 3 months before graduation.
Wow.
And
It
sorry.
just, like, I'm trying to think of what this feels like in that moment, especially at that age.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a couple things. Number one, it was terrifying. Every college rescinded their admission. Um, so, let's start there, being in the office with my mom. So, bring the name back. Anthony Blake called me and my mom into his office at the Boys Club to tell me that, Hotchkiss called and, said you can no longer kind of go back to school. So that was difficult, but I was grateful that Anthony did it.
Hmm.
And also grateful that by the end of that day, he got me into the college I ended up going to. And, it goes to show that, there are people who, kind of share the values of. He ended up being my wedding too. Um, they'll look out for you and you don't have to be alone, right? So that was an example, like, that was trying, it was traumatizing. It took me almost 20 years to kind of get over it, and kind of come to a place of forgiveness. for myself and also to Hotchkiss. But again, it was also one of those moments where I realized a couple things. Number one, the blessing of having gone to Hotchkiss. I got to graduate in 3 years as valedictorian of Stony Brook University. I had kind of wonderful Wall Street internships throughout that time. I ended up with a wonderful kind of full-time Wall Street job, right? Like, and hadn't I had that happen to me at Hotchkiss, I probably would have had it happen to me in college, which would have made things worse off for me, right? So, the benefit of hindsight suggests that sometimes things happen for a reason,
Hmm.
and I still ended up okay, and ended up in a place where I can forgive, you know. So that for me, I think was one of the more formative, albeit trying kind of moments for my faith. But it's
I d
strong
yeah,
now.
I mean, to your point, like faith, your value of faith
Yeah,
allows you to get through that and to interpret it in a way that becomes beneficial to you
and
and
I didn't.
probably to a lot of other people too.
Sure. I mean, and I did not have the, I guess, wisdom per se to recognize it in the moment. I have it now with, again, the benefit of hindsight, but it was the early beginnings of believing that things would be okay if I did the right thing, you know?
Well, and again, to your point, you did go to college, you did graduate early, valedictorian as well,
Yeah.
and then worked on Wall Street, and
Yeah.
then
And
you're
then,
that's a good enough story for a lot of people, but yours
yeah,
continues from there.
yeah, no, I mean, it was, man, like I worked on Wall Street. So my internships on Wall Street were with Lehman Brothers, and they were on the mortgage trading desk in 2005. Or no, before 2005. So this would have been 2003, 2004. And around that time, like the kind of mortgage stuff at Lehman Brothers, like really, really hot, So it was like a really kind of interesting experience. And then when I started full time, I started on the energy trading desk about 2 weeks before Hurricane Katrina hit.
Hmm.
So then the energy market thing started to kind of pick up. So then I started to think, wow, like these are not by design. These things I've just been put in these places in opportune moments and have been able to recognize it in the moment and try to leverage it. Like, how do I learn what I need to learn? Now, fortunately or unfortunately at the time, I also learned that, that career wasn't right for me, you know, which enabled me to be put in a position to get to a place that I thoroughly enjoyed, which was the kind of Silicon Valley transition. But it was not without a little bit of that pain, right? Or having gone through that bad season. It
Yeah.
ended, you know.
So when did you leave
I left
Lehman
Lehman
Brothers?
in 2007. So yeah, so early 2007. And then I joined JP Morgan. And then I got laid off in January of 2008. And again, faith, blessings, all this stuff, Mark. The day that I got laid off from JP Morgan, I got a call about a couple hours later from Stanford Business School telling me that I was accepted. And also with that layoff of JP Morgan, they gave me my bonus at the time, which was great and useful. And then also 9 months of severance, right? Let me tell you, so the interesting thing about that is now that brings me to September of 2008. And then the financial crisis happened in
Hmm.
October, right? So like there are these just wow moments for me where it's like I've been um, fortunately removed from that kind of impending bad season to like start a wonderfully productive good one. And that was like that moment, I think, in October 2008 when it started to click for me. Like as long as I just again continue to do the right thing, there's some force that's got my back, you
It's
know?
it's really interesting because I'm thinking about this as we move forward, specifically Lehman Brothers, right? So you leave Lehman Brothers really just within a year or something of them collapsing and bankrupt. It's almost like you get put in these places that, and I'll say this about the global we get put in places sometimes that maybe we weren't smart enough to make the choice, but we're put there and then we're moved from there. If we have faith in the process. And so these things like Lehman Brothers kind of falls out of your life to give you some freedom to move forward in another avenue.
Yeah, I gotta trust it. You
Yeah.
know, I when I started to realize that I'm not wholly in control of outcomes and lose some of that vanity that I had, I think things started to work out for me better and quicker. And I try to remember that every day.
So there's a phrase that has been really resonating with me lately. It's a Buddhist phrase, and the idea is that all pain comes from attachment.
Mm,
And and what you're talking about, right? That humility about what's happening and so forth, that you don't necessarily have control of it. That that freedom and detachment from what's happening, it it is, there's a freedom around that.
yeah.
And again, we keep using this word blessing. I think that that's absolutely accurate. I mean, beyond us,
Mhm.
beyond what I mean, our best plans are usually not the best plans.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah, because look, it's controlled by so many other forces. The people you work with, today's weather, sometimes you have an interview, you can't make it because there's a hailstorm. Like, what does that mean for the rest of your life? Like and it's given me an appreciation for this we that you speak of, our connectivity
Hmm.
and our sharing in the mess of it all. Like, and we have a responsibility to each other, um, to, look out for each other, limit our pain, limit our shared suffering, you know. Um, but it starts with like a humility that like we are not immune from it, you know. And it was a hard. The only way you learn it is to go through it, and it was a hard learning for me to realize that I just had to go through it,
Hmm.
engineer it myself.
Yeah, I mean, life, those messy times in life sometimes are the best, turn out to be the best times
I
for
mean,
us.
it's I mean, some of it is a little bit of like PRing your life a little bit, but
Yeah.
frankly, like I can point to like, there's probably been 4 or 5 just really traumatizing moments. Yeah, I could have done something differently to have fixed it. Um, but maybe that trauma would have been delayed for another time when I wouldn't have been as ready for it. So I'm grateful for the preparation.
Yeah, and I think at this point that you're making about PRing your life, first of all, I agree with it, but not at all. And I know you didn't mean this in a negative way, but not at all in a negative way. Like the thing about it is, if we walk around all day looking for problems, we're going to see problems all day. Like that's both philosophical and there's a neuroscience behind it, right? The Our reticular activating system, it looks sees what we look for. And so if in a situation you look for the negative, you're going to see the negative. If you look for solutions, you'll see solutions. And
Right.
so I mean, that's what I take from this PRing your life idea is like, okay, I'm in this situation. What can I do? How can I use this to help me get out of this situation and into a better place? And
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you taught me that I frankly use every single day, and is that whole good, better, how framework. Like I mean,
Mhm.
I it's easy to reflect on what went wrong, and I think once you kind of change the framing to start with what was good about it, then yeah, things could be made better, and then there's a process in the how for how you do it. That was like a good reprogramming of the brain for me, I think. And I think is a big reason why, at least when I think about the PRing, um, I think about the good, but not without the better.
Yeah.
You know?
It is, I appreciate you saying that. It is something that, like, I won't tell you something that I wouldn't do. And just like you, I use that on a regular basis. Okay, here's the situation. What's good? What's good about it? After this podcast, Nick and I will talk about what was good about it. What can we do better? How do we do better? But it's even in framing conversations to me. Like, we're going to have a conversation, and instead of me telling you something that was wrong or I don't like or whatever, let's talk about places where we're aligned first, right?
Absolutely.
And then how do we get better as a result? And I do think, that's sort of, I guess, PRing the situation a little bit, but it's, why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do it from that positive, proactive perspective?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this with judgment, I'm saying this with curiosity, right? Why do people choose not to do it? And I have a sense that that's probably some kind of a defense mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
yeah.
think that, and I was guilty of this. I think people trust their instinct too much.
Hmm.
Um, and some things just require a process and reprogramming. And I like things like that. I like frameworks, right? Because those frameworks can be practiced. Those practice frameworks can now change institutions. And then those institutions could be run better as a result. And I think in moments, look, instinct is useful um, when you need those like quick twitch fibers to activate a little bit. But um, some things can be made to be more thoughtful, you know,
Hmm.
a conversation with a colleague with feedback. Like that's not something that needs to be rushed, right? Strategy, that's not something that needs to be rushed. A relationship with your partner, that's not something that needs to be rushed. In this particular framework, when that, again, quick twitch fiber is not necessary, can only be productive. And it makes the recipient feel successful.
It's so one of the things that you've actually brought this up twice when you talked about values and how the values, your values, corporate values, become something that drives the company. And now, as you're just talking about it as well, is frameworks and can help individuals and organizations. It makes me think of point number two, and that's legacy. Because legacy, and I'd like for you to define it, but legacy that I understand from you is not just about your legacy per se, but about the more global legacy, the cultural legacy, and so forth. You mind first, if you would explain it, please, and then any thoughts you have about it?
Like, I think we all have a unique purpose on this earth um, to contribute. And I've been spending my entire life trying to figure out what that is. I'm not an artist. I am not like, writer, painter, musician, whatever. I've not, my career hasn't been fairly linear, you know. Um, so I'm trying to think, all right, what is the guiding, um, what are the guiding themes that I've been able to contribute that make people pay attention in a way that makes them feel good, that makes them feel like they want to contribute, um, to make them feel more productive and ambitious and excited, you know? And it's taken me a long time, and I'm still really thinking about that. And so, first of all, number one, just even the desire to find that purpose for the sake of contribution to a community that I'm a part of is meaningful to me. And I'm pretty I try to be as tireless as possible to figure that out. I think I'm kind of figuring it out when I think about all of the kind of happenings in my life, in my career, and they really, I think, centered around three big buckets that, combine the personal and the professional. First is like, look, I'm a part of a community that I love. Like, I'm Black and I love it, and I love our contribution to society. I love our contribution to culture, and I feel it needs to be respected. And I think the greatest um, contribution that I can make and participatory kind of like thing that I can do is to show people how important our cultural influence is, right? Um, and through my creating things and be able to inspire a message in that way, that's really, really important to me and meaningful. And I think I've been, at least over the past decade, somewhat effective at that for the community that I've been able to create. The second, and this might seem a bit self-serving, but it's tied to the first, is, you know, technology. Like I, it's not so much like how technology impacts like business, for example. It's kind of leveraging it to accelerate the first point, right? Like how do you equip these curators of culture with the tools they need to spread that culture, right? I didn't know about Silicon Valley until I was 24 years old. That's a problem, right? A lot of the engineers that we've been able to recruit for a not-for-profit I started, Code 2040, were in a very similar boat. Now they're in a position with full-time jobs that kind of, have doubled their potential earnings power, right? Put them in a position to hire more people who look like them to kind of spread culture faster, right? So there's cultural connectivity. There's using technology to make the world know this faster, right? And then lastly, I think it's just one thing that I've been good at my entire life personally, right? And also professionally is elevating brand. I mean, like myself as brand, but also the things that I kind of help support as brand.
Mhm.
Because look, I think a lot about brand as being a force for good in the world, not only as companies, the ones who do it right anyway, but also personally, right? Like, what are these values that are imbued that you want other people to understand, follow, comprehend? And if you get brand really right, you can be like the kindling to this brush fire of public opinion. And when you're changing public opinion, you're bringing the community kind of with you to support those values that you feel to be really important, right? So for me, like this finding purpose over the past 40 plus years of my life, I'm still kind of working out. But I feel really, really good about finally being in a position of knowing that, like, with all the values that I've kind of attached to myself, that I know that I'm kind of continuing to lead with, they match a kind of personal ambition for communication of these themes that I care so deeply about. And everything feels consistent. And if I'm remembered by that consistency, that's the legacy that, you know, I
You
want
know
to leave.
what, Tristan? Every time I talk to you, I remember how much I enjoy talking to you. Like it's just, it's so much fun, and I am constantly learning things from you. And one of the many things is you are very good at promoting brand, but you do it by being authentic and connected to the brand. You don't do it by saying something, you do it by being something, which I think is that authenticity is so important. I'll tell you something else that I admire you about. It's inspirational. And I said early on that you are a craftsman and an explorer. So I'm going to give just a couple of non-business examples of this that I know about you. One of those is your bookbinding, that you took bookbinding courses so that you could learn to do that. And the other one, I'm not sure which one of these I like better because they're different. The other one is taking roller skating lessons.
Yeah, I just took one last night.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's really cool. It's like, hey, I want to do this. I'm going to do this because I have faith. I have courage. I'll allow me to inspire myself with things. Um, these types of things, they're all aligned with your values.
100%. And I'm very fortunate and privileged in the position to be able to do it. Like I can afford the bookbinding course. I can afford roller skating class. I think that the when I think about um, my experience at Hotchkiss, I think a lot of folks think, all right, well, yeah, you're around those wealthy kids. That wasn't the thing that was so interesting to me. What was most interesting to me is that they were afforded a life where they could pursue their hobbies with vigor. And I never had a hobby because I couldn't afford to, you know? And part of me um, resents that of them and resents it of myself, you know? And now that I'm in a position to be able to afford some of those hobbies, I'm gonna live my life to achieve those things. Like and that feels really good to me. And I'm not going to do anything that's kind of outside of those values, right? Roller skating is fun because it allows me to participate in a community that I get to see twice a week. That we have some fun. It's a hard thing for me to learn. God, I'm like getting old. My knees aren't like that. That live as they used to be. But that's fine. Like I get to learn something, but also I get to be with people in a shared community that like I love. On the bookbinding stuff, I think that there's like um, I've, whether it's Walker and Company, whether it's anything that I build, like I've always had an appreciation for craft, right? I have such respect for people who make things. And I resent the fact that I didn't pursue the hobby of creation. And I think in hindsight, if I had the luxury to, we'd probably be having a different conversation. We probably would have met in a different way and have a different conversation, but I'd probably be an artist, you know? And why not try it now, you know?
I actually would push back a little bit on that because I think you are an artist. I think your medium is different than maybe watercolors, but you are an artist. I mean, you think about the way you conduct yourself, even something as simple as how you created the office for Walker and Co. in Palo Alto. Like, that was beautiful, the way that that was created. So I think there is some of that already.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look, I live vicariously, you know? Um, but I also love learning, you know, and I love touching the things that I'm learning. Like there's a there's a purity that goes missing, and um, a part of me that's like feels missing.
Hmm.
I think I have the next however many years, knock on wood, to live to fill that gap, and that for me, will feel fulfilling and will be the joy, the next like phase of joy, like real kind of surplus joy that I can feel in my life.
You have a sense of what that is that's missing?
Just making stuff. Like when you create, you no longer are reliant on someone else to create for you. And there's an independence and freedom that comes with that I've always loved. I mean, you and I have talked about, like just this idea of freedom. And for me, it's really important to feel that, to not feel like I owe anybody anything, but I want to, and am willing to give. Um, and I think this idea of creation and crafts, is a wonderful conduit for that, for me anyway.
This idea of freedom, like you said, I mean, it's so important to both of us. And I, there are two things that I think about in moments. One of them is moments of joy. What are those moments of joy in our life? And the other is moments of freedom. And a lot of times those go together, right? There's joy in that freedom. And I think it's undervalued. Like, I think that people don't necessarily take the time that they could to really, really be with those moments of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, capitalism does that to you, and I had to learn some of that. Like there is a terrible incentive structure that gets people to do things that they will not love, you know? And, wrapped up in that is like people aren't paid what they should. College costs too much money. Technology is taking away jobs like AI and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, you want me to chase purpose, but you don't allow me to afford it. And that, again, when I go back to that Hotchkiss hobby thing and they could afford that, that's where a lot of growing resentment comes from. I felt it, you know? Um, so you can't really have freedom, in my opinion. This is like how my thinking is changing in the type or form of capitalism we see in society today. It's just, you can try it, but it comes at a cost. And the only reason I'm able to tell you that I feel that now is because I can afford to.
So I'm thinking about this because you leave a very elite boarding school where you see the privilege, you see the freedom, if you will, to engage deeply in hobbies and so forth. And it's not very much longer after that that you're at the equivalent of that in Palo Alto, right? As a MBA student at Stanford. And do you have some of the same feelings with that?
100%. I mean, it's all the same. Like it's all the same types of students who would have been in Hotchkiss go to Stanford. No, I mean, I love my experience at Stanford, but also, and I mean, I am Stanford's number one fan, right? But I mean, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and only 400 people get accepted into that school each year. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm really one of the lucky ones. Um, but even that, like, I leave Stanford and most people will go into kind of the corporate job, to get paid. And, there's an incentive structure to keep you around, and not potentially chase those hobbies. And hopefully you hope that you get wealthy enough that, you can now do what you want, you know? That's not freedom. It's not freedom. As much as people might want to feel that it is, it's not, you know? So yeah, it's challenging. I mean, we are blessed to live in a society that um, allows us to pursue our ambition freely. But that same incentive structure does not easily enable freedom. And that's something that like you know, my relationship to this structure over the past 20 years is changing, because I've been able to see it at like honestly every level, from these internships to boardrooms. And I understand how the machinery works. Um, but it's going to continue to work that way until, there are better processes to change the institutions, to change the machinery, you know.
I had a conversation yesterday with someone about this topic of freedom and seasons. So, a couple of things we've already talked about. That he's in a season right now, which is a sort of a growth and development season,
Yeah.
so that down the road he can be in a season of freedom. And yet, those two things, that sounds as if they're two different seasons. There's overlap, obviously, between the two of those. And so, so I'm thinking about this journey because you go from Stanford, which, there's, by the way, I think Andrew Luck would say he's the number one fan of Stanford. Um, you
Might be
go,
right. You might be right.
I think you are. He's number two. If you, if you think about that and continue that thread, well, next thing you're in Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so you're continuing that part of the journey.
Yeah. The So yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, it's afforded me this kind of wonderful life and career and all that stuff. But in the same way that you talked about your friend, how he's in this growth development to lead him to a freedom, there's to me a sadness in hearing that because it's like, why does your freedom have to be delayed?
Hmm.
That's the tension here that like um I think about every single day. And most people did not get the Hotchkiss to Wall Street to Stanford to Silicon Valley pipeline. They just don't, you know? So it's important for me to, again, when we talk about gratefulness, to also reflect in the fact that my experience is uniquely singular. And I think it's important to make that clear because it is not even with that pipeline or path that I've had, I still have this tension. So I empathetically am thinking about the folks that don't have that pipeline.
Yeah.
I think about again what legacy means. It's how do we communicate in a way to get folks faster to that feeling of freedom.
And I think, and communicate with ourselves as well.
Right.
The conversation, by the way, I'm glad you brought this up because the conversation that I was having yesterday was about the fact that those two seasons don't have to be independent.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
that there are moments, the fact that you can work,
Mhm.
right? And that you can do these things, there is a gratitude and freedom even within that if you'll take that moment.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, for the things that you can control,
Hmm.
we live in a society that allows you to pursue that. But there are a lot of things we can't control. And I think that's where it starts to get tricky. But the thing is, like, I think you can spot it early. I think about the friends of mine who are still on Wall Street and have hated it for 20 years. I got out early, you know, which allowed me to kind of get closer to my definition to freedom more quickly. Their path is more delayed.
Yeah.
And I think you have this communication a lot earlier for people. They might make different decisions. They might pursue art school instead of getting the economics degree. They might pursue trade school instead of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for college. They might dot, 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 right? And that doesn't mean that they're out of a system, quote unquote, but like they are on the path of um, making decisions that they can feel good about without um, feeling like you're doing things because other people are in a way that's like mimetic and difficult, you know?
Yeah, this is really interesting. It makes me think about this back to values because
Mhm.
values, first thing I thought about was this idea of if you have a stable system,
Mhm.
that within that stable system, you can experiment.
Bingo.
And if you have values to support that stable system, that is the foundation of the stable system. It allows you to experiment because a lot of times that person that's on Wall Street for 20 years, I don't know this for sure, but I would guess one of the drivers is fear,
Yeah, 100%. And
right?
then when I experienced this, my boss got tapped on the shoulder to leave after 20 years. Like, like that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like someone who values loyalty, that's nuts to me. Each year, there's a case study written about my company, a few case studies at Stanford written about my company and me and that sort of thing. And each year I'll go and speak to the class. And these are Stanford Business School kids, right? Like I'll ask them as we talk about values sometimes, how many of them have written down their values? And there's probably like 100 people in the class every time I go. And usually there's only two or three people who raise their hands. And I reflect on it. I'm like, these are the people who are going to lead the world, you know, and they don't have a good understanding about the values that they have. And if they don't have it now, it means that they didn't have it before, right? What decisions would they have made before that were different if they know it? And also, what decisions from here forward might they change if they know it? And this by like evangelizing and communicating this like values consistency thing, I think we can get people quicker again to this like definition of freedom that they've defined for themselves and can be happy with.
It's, you know, it's one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about our conversations. In the very beginning, when we, you know, started talking about values, you're like, oh yeah, I already got these, right? And we talked about them, and then it became a decision matrix, you know, for everything. That, like, I'm really curious. It's funny, I've never asked you this. Where did that come from for you?
Which part?
The
What?
values piece. Like,
Yeah.
most people need something, typically an outside source, to say, hey, we need to work on your values. You didn't.
Yeah, I mean, primarily because yeah, people would purport their own values but not know what they are. They just it's like them PRing themselves, as I like to say. And also, like, look, man, like life is hard enough to live. I think about this for like my business. Like running a business is hard enough. Like, why make it more difficult? You know? And one way to simplify my life is to know who I am and know who I want to be around and know the sorts of things that I want to do. And there's got to be a process and a system of accountability and decision making that enables that. And look, it's going to be my first time starting a company. I wanted to put my best foot forward as a leader and show people that I was going to be consistent about some of the stuff that I did. And in those times when like I slipped, now they have the shared language to be like, Tristan, you were full of shit about like this because you didn't respect that customer in that moment. Like, you know, like that's the sort of guardrail system that has allowed me to stay sane, you know, and make the things that I've done and makes the things that I do make sense. And without it, I'd be very um, busy and without direction. So it was it was primarily a question of like, you know, or a thought like, don't make your life harder. You know, like think about these values things as a system that you can follow for the rest of your life, personally and professionally. And it worked out.
You know, this idea of system and framework and these things, which again, I think have a really strong role in stability. I want to, you know, this point again that when we talk about systems or frameworks, it sounds stagnant. It sounds like it's sort of boring, you know. That is the launch pad to be able to do these amazing things. If it is the right framework, if it is the right degree of stability.
Well, sure, it's boring, but guess what? Once I wrote it down, I won back so much time for myself because I didn't have to hang out with as many people. I didn't have to do as many things, and
Hmm.
I got to fill that time with non-boring things. You know, like it's a, it's a, it's an investment that pays off immediately, like immediately, and it reduces costs off your balance sheet or
Hmm.
or whatever. You know, and it's kind of shameful that like I'm kind of crossing my financial statement. You get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Figurative, literal balance
Yeah,
sheet.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Removes liabilities. You know?
I always thought about Tony Shea, who I used to work with years ago, wore basically the same thing to work every day, and you know, famously, I think Steve Jobs did too, and so forth. It's because they didn't want to have that decision, and would
Why
just take that decision away.
why make it harder? You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, the wonderful thing about this, I can wax poetic about it, but it started working. And when I started to feel successful, I kept doing it and it kept working.
Hmm.
So it's easy for me to say because it worked. And I just encourage people to try. And if it doesn't work, maybe there's a better system. But it's worked for me.
I do think the word that you use is exactly correct, and that is an investment, right? Because in the very beginning, it takes energy to
Yeah.
align what you're doing, but then you're rewarded for it because exactly like you said, it's, oh, this is working, and oh, this makes it easier, and this creates freedom, and all of these kinds of things. I think it, like a lot of things that are beneficial to us, sometimes we don't stop to make that investment,
Yeah.
and but it almost always pays off.
It does. And I think that the wonderful thing that I had not thought about that I benefited from is now because folks know what I'm about and what I believe in, they will share opportunities with me that fit that spec. And when that happens, it's usually highly converting. You know,
Yeah.
I have like, there's a flywheel that I've built for my own personal life that kind of continues to spin at a fast rate. And I get to choose, you know, and that feels really, really good. It does, you know.
So I let's take this. I want to just take this down to a really, really applied level for you. You're a dad.
Yeah,
So how does this fit with that?
yeah. So first of all, it comes to my parenting style, you know. Wellness. If you're not taking care of yourself or your family, you're not taking care of the business, right? To
Hmm.
connect, deep loyalty to my children. Like I encourage, teach them to, have courage. Especially as young kids, like kind of fear can creep in, and that's an okay feeling to have, right? But it's also okay to, jump off the bench and know that like I'm there to catch you. Like it's a so it's again repeating through language values that they don't have to memorize now, but by the time that they're old enough, they'll recognize a consistency in the way that like I've parented the things that I want to teach them, et cetera. Also, kind of this idea of freedom, I want my kids to have what the Hotchkiss kids had, and that was the ability to live like kids, the ability to play, um, the ability to have a hobby. And, I look, I mean, it's interesting. Like college, schooling, the kids will be fine, you know. I the thing that's most important to me, and I will feel as if I've been successful outside of just like teaching them the values that I think are important, keeping them out of trouble, that sort of thing, is to put them in a position where they can pursue a hobby to the extent that they want to feel like they can become the best person in the world at it. I don't care what it is. It could be playing video games. It could be ballet. It could be, I don't know, being a plumber, whatever. I don't care. But I think that there is value in having an excitement about it that, potentially puts them in a position to want to pursue being the best in the world at it. And kind of taking all the blessing and the privilege I have to invest in that. Because that's what I saw um, that was possible for those 14, 15, 16 year olds that I would have never had the opportunity to. I don't want to push them to be a lawyer or push them to be engineers, anything like that. That is not by any stretch. I want them to invest in their love, period.
Yeah, period is right.
Yeah. Yeah.
The the thing that I take from that, which I think is beautiful, is being an alchemist of your experiences to share that with your children.
Yeah.
You've seen the full gamut,
Mhm.
and you're going to pick and choose from that that's going to help your children be the happiest, healthiest uh, human beings that they can be.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about legacy, wow,
Mhm.
that is a legacy right there.
Consistent and true, you know?
So, got it. Just a few things before we wrap up. I feel very grateful that we're wrapping this podcast up, but you and I get to continue talking to each other as long as we want. Um, Moments of joy in your life. Can you think of some that just sort of pop up to you?
Yeah. Birth of my two children. Um, December 12th, 2018, sold my business. Um, I joined two public companies when I was 36 years old, right? Like I achieved all these things like really, really young, like um, I get to walk around my town 9 miles a day, right? Like I love that every single day. That brings me immense joy, right? One, because I can do it. Two, because it's healthy. And three, it was on my terms. Like I feel really, really good that I get to reflect in that joy every single day. Um, it's a very small list of, I mean, 10 joyful things that happen to me every single day. I mean, like we have a kind of wonderful kind of front yard. And for the first time last summer, we had hummingbirds come in, and I had never seen a hummingbird in my entire life. And now, like each summer, we see them like continue to, and it's just like looking at that and like the world stopping and seeing hummingbirds. Like it's just for me to even like be in a position where I can even pay attention to that and have it happen over and over again. Just feel, I mean, that brings me immense joy.
I said this about you that one of your greatest blessings is that you recognize your blessings. And as I'm listening to you uh, about the things, the walking and the and selling the company and the birth of your two sons and so forth, it it actually it brought me joy to think about those things. I remember
Yeah,
all of those as they were starting, and man, I'm just so grateful that I got to be, living vicariously, as you said, through those moments of joy. And now you just brought all of that back again, which is, thank you.
really
Thank you
fun.
for doing that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I'll tell you also we talked about freedom, and man, getting to talk to you today, as many times as we've talked, this is a moment of joy and a moment of freedom for me because we just get to talk.
Yeah, I love it, man. Let's do it again. I mean, I really enjoy it. And it's the truth,
Yeah.
period.
Period is right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tristan.